Look, today we move into a more direct piece of discussion about the future with high-speed broadband. And it's times like this where some of us get a bit jaded because we've had some of these conversations before. I mean, after all, fibre optic cable is not exactly new. Does anyone know when the first fibre optic cable was installed in the post office in New Zealand? A guess? When was the first fibre optic cable installed in the post office in New Zealand? What year? 83. Close. It was installed between Wellington and Lower Hutt to test the technology. It was a fibre providing 140 megabits per second, carrying up to 2,000 voice channels. So fibre technology itself is not new. And equally not new is conversations about broadband and the future possibilities. Let me quote from a nice little book here. Many of these Other transformative effects were becoming apparent, shaping the way people would live and work. In the early 1980s, the Post Office and some other official bodies were beginning to consider these, even if they did not offer solutions about how they could be handled or, if need be, forestalled. In 1980, for example, the Communications Advisory Council reported on the social and other implications of a video text service for New Zealand. And in 1981, the Commission for the Future published an important paper, Network New Zealand, Communications for Tomorrow, dealing more with the economic opportunities of new communications technologies. Amongst the social matters mentioned in official publications and speeches or by Dodrick were the growth of telecommuting, work from home, with its impact on traffic flows and the shape of future city centres. Also the issue of how best the Post Office could equip households in urban and rural areas to meet the growth of computers for work and distance education from home, and how telecommunications networks for those needing it but were not well placed to pay. There was also the cost. Well, that was the piece that I wanted to cover. The important thing was that two of the things that often get rolled off the tongue about high-speed broadband were mentioned in that 1980 study: telecommuting and distance education. And it's very easy to get jaded and say, well, hang on, we've been talking about this for a while. But then go back and think about life in 1980 versus today. Could you do the kind of telecommuting you can do today without what we've developed since? 1980 was pre-internet, it was pre-most dial-up services. The idea of actually saying, look, I'll work at home today and knock over that report, the simplest of things, was just an impossibility. The idea that when you did distance education, you would be able to download the lecture notes at your computer at home, that you would actually submit your assignments online, all those things were unheard of. So whilst it's easy to be jaded, it's also easy to recognise that many of the things that we thought about in the 1980s have in fact come true, but there is further to go. And that's really the segue, I think, to today, which is we are talking about the same services. We're going to talk about the implications for consumers, the implications for small and medium enterprises, the implications particularly for rural areas, and education and health and government services. So that's our agenda for the day, and I think the Minister has nicely set us up to say it's now time for us to step forward and figure out what it is that we think we need to do to make the most of those opportunities for New Zealand. That said, I will now move to our first speaker today, which is Andrew Miller from... you know what I've done? There it is. Andrew Miller from Alcatel-Lucent. Now, I will announce now that Andrew, like the Minister, is not able to take Q&A right now because he's actually going to go off and do some press about some things he's launching right now. So when he finishes speaking, he will be heading out. However, just as the Minister's made herself available by email, and to remind you, that's amy.adams@parliament.gov.nz, and if you've got a thought, a comment you wanted to make, you should engage with your Minister. It's what they want to do, if the truth be known. Andrew's team is, of course, out the back there with a whole pile of equipment that shows you exactly what the future looks like from the technical level. And anything that you've got about the white paper they're going to release today, any questions you have on that, you should feel free to discuss with the Alcatel-Lucent people out the back. And if you get a really interesting answer that you thought would have been good to be shared with everybody, you of course know you can share it via the Twitter feed. So with no further ado, let me just tell you that Andrew is the Managing Director and President of Alcatel-Lucent New Zealand and Pacific Islands, but his pedigree is not just vendor land. He's actually had experience in operations functions actually inside telcos with Orange France Telecom. Andrew is going to talk to us about the impact of high-speed broadband in New Zealand. Please welcome Andrew to the podium.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for inviting us up here. We'd like to present a study which outlines an economic analysis undertaken by Alcatel-Lucent's Bell Labs, which is one of the world's foremost research and development organisations, who has answered these questions specifically for New Zealand. For several years, they have been developing and applying macroeconomic access deployment models. At the request of the World Economic Forum last year, they analysed and measured the social and economic benefits associated with accelerating ubiquitous access in multiple regions of the world. Building on that work, they developed the analysis and models for assessing the impact of New Zealand's broadband initiatives, the findings of which are being released today. The availability of high-speed broadband opens up the possibility of offering innovative applications to a wide cross-section of the population. Broadband deployments around the world have shown that as end users and application developers become more familiar with the capability of broadband, they demand novel, innovative applications that specifically address their needs. It's a well-established fact that access to broadband drives GDP growth. Broadband applications connect people and businesses to information that is useful in their daily lives, improving their efficiency and productivity. Several recent macroeconomic studies have shown that an increase in broadband penetration leads to higher economic growth. A 2008 study in the US on broadband and GDP found increasing broadband penetration by 10% would produce a GDP increase of 0.18%. Broadband also improves employment rates. A 2010 World Bank study found that employment can be increased by 1.8% for a region if it increases its broadband adoption from 0 to full penetration. So what are the likely positive social and economic impacts, and how can we amplify them? So Alcatel-Lucent has been in New Zealand since the 1920s, building our country's telecommunications lifelines. We believe strongly that ICT innovation is a powerful catalyst for human and economic deployment. We are a key participant in both UFB and RBI, and are working with many of the key players to design, build, and operate these networks for New Zealand. We're a vocal supporter of the initiative to fast-track the building of high-speed broadband networks and the life-changing applications they will support to almost 98% of New Zealanders. We know from the many studies already undertaken that giving more people, schools, medical clinics, farms, and businesses access to high-speed broadband will improve our GDP. Rather than just produce another GDP generic study, Alcatel-Lucent wanted to do a grassroots analysis to understand what the real benefits will be for end users when they have access to high-speed broadband. We also wanted to know what we as a country could do to improve the social and economic impact of both UFB and RBI. So we asked Bell Labs, our research and innovation arm, to undertake a broadband benefits study that looks specifically at New Zealand. The study, called Building the Benefits of Broadband, measures two key impacts of UFB and RBI. First, Bell Labs measured the economic flow-on from building the UFB and RBI networks. They took the public and private investment in UFB and RBI and overlaid that with the build-out schedule and combined these inputs with New Zealand's social accounting matrix to determine the overall impact on incremental GDP. Secondly, they set out to determine the end-user benefits, sometimes called the consumer surplus, from the applications that UFB and RBI will support. To do this, Bell Labs chose an initial sample of existing high-speed broadband applications across health, education, business, and agriculture. They then projected the adoption pattern of those applications based on overseas experience and New Zealand data, and calculated the likely consumer and business savings over a 20-year period. Finally, and most importantly, Bell Labs undertook a sensitivity analysis to see what would happen if they changed assumptions like speed of application adoption and total level of uptake. The New Zealand GDP figure used for this study is the 2010 Reserve Bank published figure. If you'd like more information on the study and the white paper we've produced, then we'll be happy to connect you as a team later on. The study showed that the economic activity generated from just building UFB and RBI will grow our GDP by 5.5 billion over 20 years. The bulk of the impact, almost 5 billion, will be realized during the first 6 years. That represents a $1.37 GDP impact for every $1 invested. Bell Labs estimated that the total investment in the UFB and RBI builds will be around $4 billion, which correlates with a statement made by Crown Fibre Holdings chairman Simon Allen, who said the investment in the UFB build would be in excess of $3 billion. The analysis shows the incremental impact on GDP from the infrastructure investment more than covers the government's $1.5 billion capital investment. But as we've said, the real focus on the study was on the end-user benefits of applications that will run over our high-speed broadband networks. Before determining the end-user impacts of high-speed broadband applications, the Bell Labs researchers had to choose what sectors and applications to include. The economic benefits of applications come from a higher consumer surplus or greater savings as a result of doing things more efficiently. In healthcare, the savings considered included lower hospital admission and test costs, fewer emergency room visits, lower travel-related costs, lower long-term prescription drug costs, faster access to physicians, and faster care delivery, leading to savings in government expenditure on healthcare. In education, the savings considered were lower costs of skill enhancement, as well as reduced cost of course material and savings on field trips. Business savings considered were through improved productivity, lower travel-related costs from teleworking, lower network and communication expenses, and savings through putting applications into the cloud. Savings in agriculture come from increased dairy production as a result of using online farm management and dairy herd management tools, as well as automated farm data collection and analysis. So what did all those extra savings add up to? Over a period of 20 years, the expected value of the savings from the high-speed broadband applications add up to almost 33 billion. Business will provide the biggest potential savings at 14.2 billion. And in agriculture, livestock improvement have said farmers could expect a 15% improvement in efficiency using broadband applications to improve milk solid production. This will generate 9 billion in productivity gains. Not bad for an industry that's already regarded as the most efficient in the world. Savings in healthcare are estimated at almost 6 billion, and in education at well over 3 billion. So let's put the combined GDP impact of the build and the consumer surplus from the applications into context. Together, they are worth about the same to New Zealand as the money we earn every year from our wine exports. The benefits are equivalent to around 1% of GDP. But it's not just about the money. In addition to delivering economic benefits, these applications will also lead to numerous social benefits. Healthcare applications will lead to improved access to health services and increased life expectancy. Education applications will result in greater school enrollment and more choices in subjects for a student. Hard to put a dollar value on, but hugely important to the future of New Zealand. One interesting finding of the study is that there are likely to be 25 million fewer days of missed school due to sickness and truancy, thanks to remote learning application and better collaboration between parents and teachers. You remember that an important part of looking at the impact of the applications was doing a sensitivity analysis. The sensitivity analysis enables us to understand what the correlation is between different variables, such as speed of application adoption and the overall consumer surplus. The sensitivity analysis shows that there are 3 key variables to consider. Firstly, availability of relevant applications. It's important to remember that only a select sample of applications across 4 sectors were considered in this study. Secondly, the speed of application adoption. And finally, total level of application update. So just how significant are the speed of adoption and total uptake variables? The sensitivity analysis showed that a 20% improvement over the baseline in both the speed of application adoption and the total level of application uptake improves the customer surplus by 45%. That would mean the total consumer surplus calculated in the study jumps from almost 33 billion to nearly 48 billion, an increase of 15 billion. And I'm sure we all have various ideas of what New Zealand could do with an extra 15 billion. So what should we focus on to grow the economic and social benefits? Do we think that a 5.5 billion impact on GDP and a 33 billion consumer surplus is worth chasing? Well, I certainly think so. I think one of the things I hear about New Zealand is it's at the far end of the world. It's cut off from everybody else. But actually, we should be flicking the marketing. You know, if you stick New Zealand into the center of a map, it's actually, yes, beautifully situated, very safe, a fantastic place to work. And what we should do is marketing that and stop talking about the fact we are remote from the rest of the world. Connectivity these days allows us to work from anywhere. And let's start marketing that fact. And I think in terms of the global economy, in terms of where we are at the moment, it's hugely important that we start addressing these issues immediately. So, to grow the gains of our high-speed broadband investments, we need to address the key variables identified in the sensitivity analysis. Availability of applications. Without relevant, compelling, and useful high-speed broadband applications, there will be no consumer surplus. The availability of such relevant and compelling applications requires innovation, incubation, and collaboration. Without doubt, some of that innovation will occur in the R&D labs of big global companies like Microsoft and Google. But for a variety of reasons, language, culture, distance, and all the things that make New Zealand unique, many high-speed broadband applications will need to be created, adapted, or incubated here. Secondly, speed of early adoption. Before anyone can use a high-speed broadband application, they need to have a high-speed broadband network to use it on. So ensuring the quickest possible rollout is critical. But we also need to look how we can create an early bow wave of migration and accelerate application adoption. And finally, total level of uptake. It's stating the obvious to say that if more people take up a useful application, the collective benefit will be greater. But what this study shows is that even a small lift in the total uptake will drive big benefits for New Zealand. So let's take a look at how we can possibly achieve this. Why is it important that we support the development of applications in New Zealand? Two examples of applications developed in New Zealand for New Zealanders are AgHub, an online farm management tool that allows farmers to analyze farm data for improved productivity, and Minder, an online and mobile tool developed by Livestock Improvement to enable dairy farmers to improve herd management. Both AgHub and Minder are likely to become more widely used and deliver greater benefits with the rollout of UFB and RBI. We need to ensure many more New Zealand-specific applications are developed to take advantage of our networks. Innovation labs dedicated to incubating high-speed broadband applications are critical to supporting local development. An excellent example from Australia is the Institute for a Broadband-Enabled Society at the University of Melbourne, a partnership between the university, the Victorian state government, and private sector partners, including Alcatel-Lucent. As a key contributor to both UFB and RBI, Alcatel-Lucent has built a high-speed broadband lab in Wellington. We are developing this lab as an industry testbed for networks and applications, and a New Zealand base for the NG Connect program, a global ecosystem of infrastructure, device, application, and content companies. We see the potential for this lab to be a hub for industry, government, and academic collaboration on broadband applications. And while we're engaging with our partners to make this a reality, we would welcome further input and discussions from other partners. How can we accelerate early broadband application adoption? Perhaps corporate-supported teleworking provides an answer. Teleworking is gaining ground in places where connectivity, cloud-based applications, and enlightened attitudes allow workers to say goodbye to their cubicles. This shouldn't come as any surprise. Teleworking can save employers on real estate and facilities costs, reduce what workers pay for transport, increase productivity, and improve the work-life balance. The US Department of Agriculture estimates it could save $250 million a year from its teleworking program, mainly from reduced real estate costs and increased productivity. There's a green element too. According to Telework New Zealand, If 23% of our working population worked from home 2 days a week, we could reduce our transport carbon emissions by 400,000 tonnes a year. Fibre-based broadband, in particular, solves a number of the connectivity, performance and security issues that have hindered a broader embrace of teleworking to date. Imagine if a large city council with 5,000 employees subsidised a UFB connection at employees' homes to provide a secure VPN connection to cloud-based work applications. The outcome for the council would be higher productivity and a reduction in real estate costs. The outcome for the employee would be an improved work-life balance and an incentive to use their UFB connection for personal entertainment, health and education applications. Teleworking can also assist in the return to work of those women who have just had families, in that it offers the flexibility to manage their time more effectively. And let's face it, in the recent poll for Asia-Pac, New Zealand sits at the bottom of the league for women leaders. And it's a renowned fact that if you have a better balance of women leaders at your executive and board level, you are a more successful company. The outcome for the community is a bow wave of early UFB adoption that would drive higher economic gains for New Zealand in the long run. Alcatel-Lucent supports teleworking, and we plan to utilise UFB and RBI to make remote working options more available to our 800 New Zealand staff. If enough large organisations take a similar approach, together we can fast-track high-speed broadband application adoption and thereby increasing the long-term social and economic benefits. Finally, how can we address the total uptake challenge? New Zealand is a nation of small businesses. According to Statistics New Zealand, we have almost 460,000 small businesses employing fewer than 19 people. The vast majority employ less than 5 staff. So what are some of the things we need to be doing to grow the overall take-up of applications? Of course, we need to ensure that our policy frameworks encourage aggregators of demand in healthcare and education to use high-speed broadband applications. We also need to ensure that the sector legislation is modernised to support transacting online. For example, the status of electronic health records, a common problem in many countries, where we stick all our records onto a computerised system, but we're unable to share them between different local health boards. We also need to ensure that broadband applications are ubiquitous and more seamlessly work across fibre, copper, 4G LTE wireless networks on multiple devices and in multiple operating environments. But perhaps most importantly, we need to ensure that high-speed broadband applications address the needs of New Zealand's 460,000 small businesses. Xero is a great example of this. By sorting out businesses' accounting headaches using a cloud-based software-as-a-service model, Xero have provided businesses with a reason to embrace high-speed broadband. Alcatel-Lucent is working with partners to consider what other ways we can address small businesses via high-speed broadband. We know the potential rewards for New Zealand of embracing our high-speed broadband initiatives are huge. We're looking at the initial investment paying for itself with a $5.5 billion contribution to our GDP. We've also shown that the potential is significant. The initial study alone shows $33 billion of consumer surplus. The savings we, individuals and businesses, make as a result of doing things more efficiently. We've also shown that a slight increase in uptake further improves that by another $15 billion. So let me then leave you with these three thoughts. I believe that to make the most of high-speed broadband for New Zealand, we need to innovate, incubate, and collaborate to create new applications that are relevant to New Zealand. We need to accelerate early adoption because every moment we wait reduces the long-term return. Finally, we need to drive the total uptake as high as possible. And the sooner we start, the sooner we start reaping rewards. Thank you very much.